can compare how attacks of different strengths have different activation pathways. In summary, we developed BLUF, an interactive system to understand how adversarial perturbations flow of the learning model. BLUF visualizes most activated, inhibited, excited activation pathways after the attacks, and provides flexible comparison of attack escalation. Thank you all for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Traditional flow visualization methods, such as line integral convolution, convey information about the underlying flow structure. However, the influence of regions in the flow on each other is not visualized. In my talk, I will present a new dense flow visualization technique, creating a multi-level hierarchy that provides insight into the region's connectivity using a probabilistic model. For more specific details, come to my talk.
Blockchain has gained more attention and its applications are emerging. We collect 76 blockchain visualization tools and systematically classify them into 5 aspects: target blockchain, blockchain data, target audience, task domain, and visualization type. In the end, we look at open challenge in blockchain visualization.
The mixture graph is a data structure for compressing, rendering, and querying segmented volumes. Biomedical segmentations have evolved from mere annotations to first-class modalities. The mixture graph stores the computations required to render such nominal data directly on the GPU, including pre-filtering and lighting. Segment distributions can be queried efficiently using regions of interest.
There are many similarities between visual analytics and interactive optimization. The design of visual interfaces for optimization systems is an application of visual analytics. However, many optimization systems are automated. If you are thinking of building an interactive optimization system, come to our talk. We have prepared some tips for you.
Hello VIS community. I'm Christoph Garth, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session where, together with the other members of the reVISe committee, we will give you an update on how VIS is evolving and describe to you some of the changes that have already happened and that will be happening at VIS 2021. The reVISe committee is myself, Chen, Alex Endert, Petra Isenberg, Alexander Lex, Shixia and Ynnerman. Here's a bit of an outline of this session. In the next 15 minutes or so, I will give you a brief overview of the restructuring activities for IEEE VIS that began in 2016 and will culminate next year, including a motivation for why restructuring was needed in the first place. I will then give you a quick summary of the three major areas of change, which are the VIS governance structure, the unified area model that replaces the existing setup of the three conferences, and how the reviewing process is affected by all of this. After I'm done, there should be plenty of time for your questions and comments, and for this, all of the reVISe committee is here. The restructuring process was originally began in 2016, when the VIS Executive Committee struck the Restructuring Committee, consisting of Hans Hagen, Daniel Keim, Tamara Munzner, Stephen North, with Hans-Peter Pfister as the chair. This committee was tasked with exploring how the continued growth of the umbrella conference, IEEE VIS, both in terms of paper numbers and in intellectual diversity, could be channeled to keep VIS a growing and vibrant conference, with space for new and emerging areas and topics. The fact that there were three sub-conferences with overlapping scopes but different processes and governances was perceived by many as confusing and worthy of improvement. If this image here resonates with you, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the Restructuring Committee took up work and produced several reports and held 2 community meetings at Dagstuhl and at Banff. Overall, their ultimate recommendation was that unification of IEEE VIS should be strongly considered and is supported by a large majority of the community. They recommended to institute several new committees tasked with improving specific aspects of the conference. By the way, you can look at all the reports produced by the Restructuring Committee on IEEEVIS.org under Organization and History. The VIS Executive Committee then took up this idea and instituted a second committee, reVISe, in 2018 to develop a specific proposal to implement unification of VIS, including an area model that replaces the VIS conferences, a unified mechanism for handling papers, and an integrated program that addresses the full scope of topics represented at VIS. Consequently, reVISe began working towards such a proposal in February 2019. We met weekly on Fridays and took a broad approach, looking for example at what other conferences were doing, evaluating various area models, etc. We produced a number of working documents, all of which are publicly accessible, as are our meeting minutes. So while I'm not going to go into too much detail on our process here, this is all documented in a Google Drive folder that is also linked from IEEEVIS.org. Our initial activity concluded with a set of recommendations for implementing a unified VIS conference. The major points of our proposal were the adoption of an area model that encompasses the topical breadth of IEEE VIS while allowing flexibility and guided evolution. Transition towards a unified governance structure with a single VIS steering committee besides the VIS Executive Committee. Changing to a unified reviewing process, drawing on a unified program committee to ensure that the conference can grow with respect to topics and submission numbers. We presented this proposal to the VIS Executive Committee and the vast InfoVis and SciVis steering committees, which ultimately led to these committees ratifying our proposal after some valuable modifications. If you're interested, you can find our proposal on IEEEVIS.org as the amended recommendations document. This also has a lot more detail than I will present here. Since VIS 2019, reVISe has been assisting with planning and realizing the transition to these new formats. The governance transition is actually already complete, and the area model will be implemented for next year's VIS. So I will take a couple of minutes in the following to give you a bit more of an idea of what has already changed and what the area model will look like. Let me point out that we have also written about this in the newly minted IEEE VIS blog, which you can also find on the conference website. One of the more tricky aspects of unifying IEEE VIS in terms of scientific content, as it has existed in the past, is the non-uniform governance. By this I mean that there have been 3 steering committees, one each for VAST, InfoVis and SciVis, cooperating with each other and the VIS Executive Committee, but also making independent and often different decisions. This created a lot of coordination overhead and made it difficult to evolve the conference at a high level. And it also created differences between the tracks, for example with respect to the distinction between conference papers and journal papers, reviewing and other aspects. To unify the conference in terms of scientific content also strongly indicated that the governance structure should be unified as well. Before thinking about a specific new structure, we set out to define some goals that any such structure should be able to accomplish. Ultimately, the governance structure must be able to ensure the long-term governance of IEEE VIS as the annual meeting of a growing visualization community. The sometimes difficult to distinguish subfields should not be reflected in this governance, to avoid the creation of silos with respect to topics, administrative processes, content curation, and external representation. So that a unified governance structure can effectively function, the workload has to be distributed across several bodies, each with different purview and responsibilities. Importantly, to ensure the trust of the community, it is paramount to have transparency and representation in both decision-making and also in the appointment of the decision-makers, the governance positions. This can be achieved by more rapid turnover than occurred in the past, and by actively fostering the engagement between the community and the governing bodies, that is, the committees that actually run the conference and make the calls. The specific recommendation we made at VIS 2019 to the steering committees and the VIS Executive Committee followed these goals and ended up being adopted by vote of all steering committees and the VEC in April 2020. reVISe has worked out a transition timeline, and as of VIS 2020, the transition is complete. Let me give you a high-level overview of the changes. First, the three steering committees of VAST, InfoVis, and SciVis are replaced by a single VIS steering committee, whose mandate is now focused on governance and scientific oversight of all of IEEE VIS. In a sense, this is the highest level committee and can operate with fewer members than the direct combination of VIS SCs. Much of the executive responsibilities of the former steering committees are transferred to the VIS Executive Committee, the VEC, which focuses on all operational aspects and the executive organization of the conference, and has also transferred the scientific responsibility to the VIS Steering Committee. This provides for a clearer separation of concerns. Scientific decision-making now rests with the steering committee, while executive aspects squarely rest with VEC. Formerly, each conference had its own set of paper chairs and its own review process. These are now unified into a larger committee of paper chairs, with a set of 2 area paper chairs for each area and 3 overall paper chairs to provide oversight and consistency. Together, the paper chairs committee will be conducting a unified review process starting next year. I will go into more detail on the area model in a little while. And similarly, the 3 sets of program committees are replaced by a unified program committee that shoulders all the work of reviewing submissions across the entire conference. So, in addition to unifying existing structures and providing for a clearer separation of concerns, we also propose to institute a new committee, the so-called Area Curation Committee, which is tasked with observing and guiding the area model. The workload involved in detailed analysis of the area's evolution indicated really that a separate committee should handle this, and also should propose changes to the areas to the VIS Steering Committee, whose responsibility it is then to actually implement these changes. More on this also in a little bit. So here's the literal big picture, an overview of the different bodies of the VIS governance in one chart, together with their interactions and responsibilities. Let me point out that this image is also available in the governance blog post. As you can see, there is a fair amount of people involved in making the conference happen, and we hope and expect that they will be able to work together more effectively in this new structure. I want to point out one new and important aspect of the governance structure as we designed it. In both the VIS Steering Committee and the VIS Executive Committee, 4 members are now elected by the VIS community, 1 each every year for a 4-year term. This allows for increased representation, transparency, and turnover. So how will this work? Who can run for a position and who can vote? Here's a very quick rundown. Nominations for each of the positions will be solicited, and there will be a minimal formal vetting of the candidates by the VIS Executive Committee. To ensure that the committees can perform their function, candidates must of course bring the required background and expertise. For the VIS Steering Committee, this would be generally a high scientific standing and some documented experience with scientific leadership within the VIS community. For the VIS Executive Committee, it is necessary to bring some prior experience in the VIS conference organization. This is typically a couple of years of service in an organizing committee role. The eligibility to vote also follows a very inclusive approach. Anyone who has attended VIS or contributed to VIS in some capacity in at least 3 of the 5 years before the election is automatically eligible to vote. In addition, it will be allowed to self-declare as a member of the community and then also receive full voting rights. Overall, the details of the election process are in the making, but the first one will be conducted before VIS 2021 to elect the first members of VSC and VEC. Which positions exactly will be open and what the election modalities will be is going to be announced at some point leading up to VIS 2021. We think that the unified governance is a great fit for the diverse community that is IEEE VIS. In the interest of time, I had of course to gloss over many details here. Let me point out that more info is available on IEEEVIS.org under Organization and History/Restructuring. Let's now turn to the other big change coming to VIS 2021, the unification of the 3 current conferences under an area model. The motivation for this is to be found in the original recommendations of the Restructuring Committee. Among other things, it doesn't appear feasible to conduct a reviewing process for the amount of submissions that VIS receives, that's on the order of 500 per year currently, without some form of additional structure or topical subdivision. So our process of thinking about areas began again by devising specific goals. First, to allow the organization of the review process, where each area can be handled by what we thought was best 2 area chairs, leads to an approximately optimal area size of about 100 submissions. Many more than that would be difficult for 2 chairs to handle, while many fewer might create artificial distortions in the review process. So we intended to describe areas to receive roughly between 50 and 150 submissions, with the optimum being 100. We also opted to allow trading off the topical cohesion of areas with practical considerations, leading to a grouping of related topics or topics where reviewer expertise is typically linked under one area. Importantly, we set out to accommodate the intellectual diversity present at VIS and allow it to grow. This means avoiding artificial too sharp boundaries between areas and making the areas kind of fuzzy in a sense, to allow for a free distribution of expertise, not limited to one area, and encourage cross-cutting research. We intentionally brainstormed initial area models very broadly and considered how such models are implemented at other conferences. This was followed by detailed discussions and ultimately also quantitative evaluation, where we looked at past VIS papers in an effort to predict the number of per area submissions for different models. I can't really go into the details here, but you have written about this in the amended recommendations document. The model we ultimately converged on, and which will be implemented starting in 2021, has 6 areas. I won't be describing these areas in detail here, but we have set up a page on IEEEVIS.org that provides a detailed description of each area, plus a number of example papers that we selected as typical fits for these areas. So I would really encourage you to go take a look there for all the details. So next I want to give you a high-level overview of the review process as it's going to work. As I already mentioned, per area there will be 2 area paper chairs who will handle most of the mechanics of the review process. That is, for example, plagiarism checking, reviewer assignment, recommendations for borderline cases, etc. In addition, there are 3 overall paper chairs who oversee the entire papers process. They will be responsible for coordinating the call for papers and the process timeline and ensure consistency, especially in decision-making and handling of conflicts of interest. So their role is to make sure that all areas have roughly identical processes. They are also responsible for making the ultimate decisions about which papers to accept, but they will rely on the area paper chairs to prepare these decisions for them. All the reviewing is delegated to the Unified Program Committee, where all reviewers will be able to review in all areas. The specific assignments are negotiated between the area paper chairs and the overall paper chairs in an attempt to achieve an optimal matching. The overall process is fairly non-trivial and complex. However, reVISe has attempted to think through all the details and corner cases and authored a process description for next year's chairs to lean on. Let me also say a few words on how the best papers process is going to work. An independent best paper committee proposed by the paper chairs will decide on the best papers, based on nominations that are filtered up from the area paper chairs. The overall number of best papers will be a percentage model of the submissions, in a model that is not unlike the one found at ACM Chi. A fairly crucial component of the unified review process is to match 50 papers to 160 to 170 strong unified program committee. To make this work in practice, reVISe has also designed a new set of keywords. These are the ones that you will have already seen if you submitted a paper for this year. The goal of these keywords is to allow reviewers to better describe their expertise and thus allow for a better automated matching to relevant submissions. This goes hand in hand with substantial improvements to the PCS bidding interface that will rank papers according to expertise, for example, based on the new keywords. Furthermore, we are working with PCS to incorporate additional convenience facilities such as filtering by keywords into the interface, which should make the bidding process both more pleasant and also more meaningful. Furthermore, we have performed a bit of analysis that indicates that the automatic matching should work reasonably well if each PC member bids on about 50 or so papers in the new interface. The final assignments of reviewers to papers will be fine-tuned from the automatic assignment by the area paper chairs and the overall paper chairs, bringing in all their expertise and knowledge of the topics. The web page we set up to describe the area model and the review process contains an FAQ, trying to anticipate your questions. For example, the fact that the areas are intentionally unsharp can lead to some confusion if you're an author. Which of multiple possibly matching areas should you submit to? The short answer, it shouldn't really matter too much. Since the program committee is unified, expertise for a particular topic can be allocated to where it is needed. If the area chairs feel that a paper has been submitted to an area where it is not a good fit, they may coordinate with the chairs of another area and transfer the paper in exceptional cases. So, a good guiding principle to the question, where should I submit, would be simply submit the paper to the area where you think your paper makes the strongest contribution. Furthermore, let me make clear that the role of areas is limited to the review process. Areas will not be reflected in the integrated program per se, which may be laid out according to other criteria. And, crucially, areas will not play a role in the selection of best papers. Let me point you again at the area model webpage we set up, which provides more detailed answers to these and many other questions. If you have a question that is not already answered there, please don't hesitate to ask, and we will make sure to include it. Furthermore, we have also written 2 blog posts going into a bit more detail on the keywords and how they stand to affect you if you're an author or a PC member, and how they should be used. Let me finally say a few words about the long-term perspective of the area model. Topics are likely to evolve, new topics will emerge, areas may grow or shrink, and so on. To shepherd the evolution of the area model, as pointed out before, the Area Curation Committee, or ACC for short, will be instituted, comprised of 9 members. Their job is really to continuously evaluate the health and function of the area model, for example, by doing multi-year data analysis of the submission numbers, the keyword use, and the review process. From this, they can generate proposals for changes to the area model, which will be passed to the VIS steering committee, who will then ultimately decide on whether to implement them or not. So the area model is not immutable and set in stone. Rather, making changes to it will be an ordinary aspect of the conference organization. It is expected, however, that such changes are infrequent and medium term and don't happen every year. Importantly, the ACC will also liaise with associated events whose specific topics may overlap with the topics represented in the area model to ensure that these events can continue to integrate well with the main conference. And also, ACC will be talking to TVCG to make sure that any evolution of the area model is in agreement with the journal and with the scope of the journal. Coming to an end here, let me point out that I have not mentioned one of the more visible changes yet. IEEE VIS will have a new name, the IEEE Conference on Visualization and Visual Analytics. Let me take the opportunity here to thank the large set of people that dedicated lots of time, energy, and thought to unifying VIS, from the original restructuring committee, the participants of the Darkstuhl and Banff meetings, my reVISe colleagues, the members of the previous governances, that is the VIS 2019 Executive Committee and the 2019 Steering Committees, as well as all of you that provided input in last year's restructuring session. Thank you very much for your efforts. And with this, I'm done and we can move on to the Q&A. Thank you.
So, hey, this community, we're glad you're all joining us here. This is all of reVISe, and we're super happy to also have Lisa Avila from back here. And I guess we're ready for your questions. We actually collected some while the video was running already. I'm just going to read them out. This is one about eligibility to be a candidate for the election for the VIS steering committee. So Arvind was asking, does high scientific standing and experience with scientific leadership as it pertains to the VSC preclude post-PhD early career researchers running for elections? Alex, do you want to provide a brief answer on that?
Yeah, so the as I mentioned on Discord, it isn't specified beyond that in the charter, but kind of like the intuition behind it, that this is somebody who could also be like an area paper chair in the new model.
All right. Another set of questions that came in was pertaining to testing the area model by taking this year's accepted papers and seeing how they map on the areas. If you were an author or a submitter this year, you should have gotten an email from us where we tried to survey all authors on all submitters on what area they would have submitted to. I think we got a good number of responses, and we did some analysis on that. Unfortunately, it's not really in presentable shape, but the results, as so far as they look, instilled us with some confidence that the area model is going to work well. This is also going to be part of the work that the area curation committee is going to do over the next year, is to work on this a little more. Okay. This is a comment. Petra, do you want to take the one about the use of keywords in bidding? The question is, if only 1/10 of the papers is bid on, it would be critical to disclose which keywords each program committee will filter on to ensure that your paper can at least be seen.
Yeah, so Natalie had the idea that if you are a paper or if you are a paper author, one of the things you have to do is choose keywords that indicate which expertise of the PC you want for reviewing your paper. And this is actually a critical thing to keep in mind for next year, is that you don't pick keywords that describe the content of the paper, but that you pick keywords that describe the expertise that you want. So what kind of reviewers do you want to attract to your paper? So the comment Natalie makes is good, is that if you want to attract a certain expertise, you might want to know what kind of expertise is available in the PC, like how many PC members have chosen this and this keyword as expert, knowledgeable, and so on. So this is something that needs to be looked into, is whether or not this information could be made public. I think on an average basis, like, here we have our whole PC. This is the expertise ratings we have across the whole PC. That's not a problem. We would have to look into whether this is like too personal information to make public on a per PC member basis. But this is something that I think is a very interesting idea, and it's just probably ACC or the VEC would have to check out and think about in more detail on how this could be done.
I can fill in a bit on that as well. The design choice, having the unified PC, of course, there are some consequences of that in terms of the bidding process and the assignment of reviewers. But I think the consequences of that are outweighed by the benefits of keeping the full pool of reviewers available. And the whole area model really relies on the fact that we can do that to maintain the balance between the areas. So I think we've found a good compromise. But of course, there are a lot of details that need to be worked out for the area papers chairs and the overall papers chairs in the years to come now. So I'm sure we will encounter some details and some re-engineering of some of the processes, but we've taken that into account in the bootstrapping of the whole process for next year.
Yeah, maybe I also want to add that we are well aware that an effective use of the keywords mechanism is very important for the review process to work feasibly. So what we've already begun doing, and this was largely Petra's contribution, authoring 2 blog posts on how the keywords are going to affect you, whether you're an author or a PC member. And this also includes some information on how we think the keywords could be most effectively to get good review for your paper. And this will be part of the mandate of ACC also to develop this further, to watch out for keywords or keyword abuse, or maybe keywords that aren't very useful over the long term, and propose changes to this. And we'll make sure that when it comes time for next year's submissions, that we will again communicate proactively about what we think is important about the keywords.
Another thing that we would like to encourage, and we had a discussion among the new papers chairs already, I think, is we would really like to encourage reviewers to bid, or program committee members to bid on more papers than they have done in the past, so that we can get a better feeling. There are some papers where you have to solicit the help of people who are less qualified, because we are just simply lacking people who have been bidding on them. So we will really strongly encourage all the members of the program committee to extend the number of papers that they actually bid on slightly in the coming years.
Yeah, I should also add, I see some sort of a little bit of panic on the Discord about this bidding process that is happening. We've requested from the reVISe side a whole bunch of changes to PCS to be made that will simplify bidding for PC members. So PC members will be able to search, like the one thing that mainly the keywords are for, that there will be a match score calculated, that everybody who's been on the PC before, this is explained well in the blog post about the keywords, for those of you who are not familiar with the process. But there's this match score that you can sort by, but there are many other things you can sort by, including the area things were submitted to, individual keywords you might be interested in, things such as show me papers where I have set this and this expertise on. So, this keyword match score is not the only thing that will be used in the bidding process.
Okay. I really don't see any other high-level questions about the new governance or the papers process.
I guess there's one other comment. So somebody made a comment saying there's a bunch of papers that don't get bid on. So I actually did, for the 2 years I was paper chair, I did an analysis on that. And out of the roughly 500 papers that did get submitted to InfoVis in these 2 years, there were a maximum 2 papers that didn't get bid on. And for the paper chairs, this is then their task to find good reviewers for their papers, right? It's not that the bidding is the only thing that will determine who will be a reviewer for a paper, a PC member, right? The area paper chairs will have the task to look at the assignment that's being done. And then for those particular papers, they will find good reviewers.
Yeah, so there's more requests from Karen to communicate more actively about how the papers process is going to work. I hope we started this today, at least in some ways, and we'll continue this hopefully over the next year. Good. Let me see what else is there. Will there be an effort to update the list of expertise areas? It is very long and often redundant. This should be addressed, I think, with the new keywords, which really replaces the old expertises. Am I understanding the question correctly? Okay, any other high-level questions?
Yeah, so Danielle had a paper, a question, well, it's late here, had a question of whether the match score now with the new keywords better aligns. So we do have some data from this year's submission process, and it looks like at least that it helped people better find interesting papers. I mean, that's the main purpose, right? Help the PC members find interesting papers that they want to review. But there needs to be a little bit more data collected, and that's what the ACC is for. So they will actually look at the keywords over time, use over time. They can look at what people bid on, what the match scores were, and see how the keywords work, if there are any redundant keywords, if they're missing keywords. You will see when you fill out these keywords for the first time. Right now, there are a bunch of open text fields implemented where you can say, well, this keyword is missing. And then if you see, or the ACC sees enough people filling in like, hey, sports is missing. And now if you have 50 people who fill in sports is missing over a couple of years, then this is something that should be added, right? So that there's a lot of built-in process for updating these keywords based on submissions and needs of PC members and paper submitters and reviewers.
So I wanted to answer a question that's been that Bettina Speckmann has posed about why don't we get more people to look at papers and have like a PC meeting style. I don't want to comment on the specific benefits or drawbacks of that. I just wanted to say that reVISe's mandate was to unify the conference, and we did that and modified the review process in a way that is necessary for this unification. But we didn't tackle other things that could be improved with the review process. For example, there's like open reviews, or like how should we review, how many people should review, what about double blind, and so on. All of these questions are important for the community to answer, but they're not really what reVISe has been doing. And so I hope that we as a community tackle these kinds of issues going forward.
Okay, thanks, Alex. There's a question, will the workshops and associated conferences continue to each operate independently with their own criteria for judging papers? The answer is yes. They have been operating independently. They will continue to do so. However, they will actually have a better way of liaising with the main conference, so to speak, because the ACC now has as part of its mandate to actually go and talk to associated events and workshops to figure out where there are topical overlaps and whether these can create problems. So we believe this is actually also solved, hopefully better in the future than it was in the past.
A few questions here on the potential of papers not fitting into any of the areas and sort of new emerging fields. And I think that this is a very relevant question. And I think that's one of the tasks of the area curation committee, is not only to be reactive, but also proactive in terms of looking at new and emerging fields. So hopefully we will take care of that, and we will be closely monitoring with the number of performance indices how the area model is working. And I think that's the mechanism that's needed in that particular case. There's also been questions about transferring papers that have ended up in the wrong area. And of course, that's something that the area chairs and the overall paper chairs will have to deal with if there are situations like that appearing.
Yeah, Anders, just to build on that a little, the ACC, it's also going to look at the size of these areas over time. So this goes to the emerging area, or maybe the unfortunate sort of decline of an area maybe that was very popular, and sort of looking over time as to how many submissions go to which areas, if they get too big, too small, too similar to existing areas, things like that.
Correct.
So there are some questions about how this influences other workshops and associated events, and the simple answer is it doesn't. Those things, they remain just the way they were with the same process. And then there was a follow-up comment on this, that the workshops and the associated events might have to take up slack in areas like perception and cognition. I don't really understand why that would be, because we have like area one is theory and quant, or like, what is it exactly? But it's essentially, area one is the home for perception and cognition. So I don't see a change in that respect.
Yeah, so as it was mentioned before, we actually did do coding. We love looking at. We looked at a lot of papers, and while we were creating areas, this was not a process where we said, here are 6 areas, this is going to be it. It took a long time for this to evolve, and we had lots and lots of different combinations and things put together. A number of, we went from 3 to 12 to find anything in between to find a good number. And in one part of the process, we actually coded at least 1 full year of papers. It might have been 2. And we put them into areas. There wasn't a single paper where we would have said, this doesn't fit anywhere. So I'm fairly confident that people will find a place for their papers, and they don't have to go to associated events unless people were already targeting those in the first place.
Petra, there are some questions appearing here comparing Kai and our new setup. I think you're the right person to just give us sort of a very brief statement on what the main differences are between Kai and VIS.
Yeah, so Kai has areas such just like we will have, and the main difference is that at Kai, the PC members are already pre-assigned to the areas before submission time. So when you are choosing to send a paper to a specific subcommittee at Kai, you see who are all the potential PC members that will be the primaries and secondaries for your paper. This is not the case here, where we wanted to have the model designed in a way that expertise can be drawn from the whole PC, so that a single person with expertise in A and B wouldn't only be available to area A. And that they could also just pick the papers they were interested in rather than just from a subset. So that is the main difference. And then in the process of Kai, it's not our equivalent of our paper chairs that make most of the decisions. The paper chairs there are more, the subcommittee chairs, they're more, I would say, managers of this process of coming to a conclusions. I would say that here in our model, the paper chairs have more decision power than at Kai, where the primary and secondary are the main people making a decision. And then there's the PC meeting that sometimes, but very rarely, I agree with Niklas's comment that he made here. Rarely have I seen a real discussion emerge in these PC meetings, but that's a whole different story. If we ever wanted to have that process, that would be a separate thing.
I wanted to also say that the reason why we're doing this with the areas like we're doing it instead of having separate area committees is we didn't want to take 3 silos and create 6 silos out of it, right? That is clearly not the intention, right? We want to unify the conference, and we want to have like a great home for papers that do perception, but also have some technical contribution and so on. So all of these kind of in-betweens that are kind of like, we're really not well served by the current 3-tiered structures, are supposed to have a much better home with the adequate expertise across this unified program committee.
Yeah.
There are quite a few very interesting, they're flashing by very quickly in Discord here, but some interesting ideas that are being brought up with, for instance, the suggestion to have a second round of bidding to ensure that we are covering all the papers. That's an interesting thought to take with us.
Yeah. Let me take this also as an opportunity to plug the reVISe amended recommendations document, which also has a lot of the thoughts that we put into choosing this particular area model. And these are still valid, so that has a lot of additional background info also on why we ended up not doing certain things, for example. One question that's been coming through here is the area model will generate a lot of data. Is that data going to be open? Well, the ACC is going to collect this data and archive it also. And the current plan is, as far as this does not infringe on author privacy and other things, to make this open. Right? ACC will prepare a report every year and present it to the community. That's part of the mandate. And based on this report, also will generate a proposal for changes to the area model to the steering committee, which will then be the body responsible for making a decision on this. But ACC will collect data, prepare a report, and collect arguments for changing the area model. And these arguments, I think, will be as open as possible. So that was planned from the beginning to have this out in the open.
That's actually a good point. Maybe we should also mention that also the other committees, the VSC and the VAC, they will be or are already producing public minutes, just like the reVISe committee did these 2 years, that everybody can go and read.
Great. Changing the topic a little bit, there was a question about the timeline for getting the VIS committees done for next year. Is there any status to report on that? Maybe just go to the next session to learn more.
Yeah, I think so there's one thing that is changing, I guess, this year, is that the decisions are now being made by this newly formed steering committee and the newly formed VAC. And because the forming of these committees isn't entirely finished, I think at least on the VAC side, there have been some delays. So the VSC appointed positions are done, but Lisa, maybe you can give an update on what's happening on the VAC side.
Sure. Yeah, we have quite a few of the VEC appointed positions allocated. I apologize. And there, in the next session, there is going to be a, sorry. There is going to be a link to a Google form for self-nominating if you are interested in joining the organizing committee, since there are still several open co-chair positions. So you can join that, see what positions are open, see if one of them interests you, and send your information in that Google form. And if you have any questions on what any of those positions are, feel free to reach out to me. You can send that to becchair@IEEEVIS.org.
All right.
Yeah, and the goal for the future is to have all the nominations done before the next year's conference. It's just this transition year the whole assignment was a little more difficult than usual.
All right. Are we out of questions?
There was one question about hiding the areas for submitted papers in the reviewing process.
Hiding it during the review process or after it's finished?
I
think this is about kind of like publishing which area paper was submitted.
Yeah. Because during the review process, the areas will be visible to the during bidding and during review as well. After, this is something that we're looking into, whether and how we can publish. So if you scroll up, I think you can see the old messages. There was a long thread in the reVISe Discord about that. There are many places where this information could be published. It could, on Chi papers, for example, it's somewhere in the header of each paper. This would require changes to the template, which we would have to figure out who approves that, or can this just be done? And the other question is whether this can be part of the digital library metadata, which Gautam has promised to look into. So I think there's no, if it can technically be done, why not?
I mean, this is just my personal view on that, but I think the area model is here to help us organize, to support the reviewing process, and manage the whole community to some extent. But also we have to take measures and make sure that we don't introduce new silos. And I think if we brand papers as belonging to a specific area, I think we're taking one step in that direction, perhaps. So that there's some sort of value in not letting the areas be too visible once things have been published.
Okay, so maybe that needs more discussion because yeah, I mean, there are people arguing for it's part of the transparency of the whole process, right? If we want to be fully transparent, then we need to publish what happened during the review process. And I'm pretty sure the ACC will produce a report that says here are all the areas, this is how many papers went into, this was their acceptance rates, and all of that stuff.
Sure. I agree with that.
Yeah.
There's a question about kind of like shared reviewer norms. Andrea says, like an overall paper chair, do you have some answer to that? Are we planning on developing any shared reviewer norms now that we have people from previously different conferences all review potentially the same set of papers, and there might have been different cultures and so on? So are we like actively trying to do anything about that?
This is something that we have to carry with us, I think. I think it's hard to say anything about at this point, but it's certainly something to consider.
So from a purely personal perspective, I think it's also good to be mindful of the speed of changes that we're making. Making too many changes at once might also be difficult. I'm not advocating against anything, but we believe this is already a very substantial change to transition to a unified reviewing process, and overloading that with all sorts of additional stuff. I wonder whether that could work too well. There's one more question about the ACC reports, or what they're going to be about. This is aggregate statistics wouldn't be very helpful. Well, our plan is not to actually publish only aggregate statistics, but as much raw data as we can publish. We can't, of course, publish any details about who were the reviewers and such things. We can probably publish something like a list of papers per area and maybe keywords that they used. We'll have to look into that. So we're trying to be actually as transparent and as open as possible. And we want people to draw their own conclusions from this data and maybe come up with suggestions for this. Now, what the mechanism would be for feeding such suggestions, I think that's to be determined. But at least we want to create the foundation for everybody to be able to do this and understand how this conference works for them.
There seems to be a few comments on this transparency versus silos, accountability, etc. And I'd just like to emphasize that the whole governance structure, the whole design, one of the fundamental principles has been transparency, and this is really what we want to accomplish. And it's been a guiding principle throughout the whole process. So whatever we can do to improve transparency is, of course, things that we will implement.
There's a question about by Bernice about lingering uncertainties and whether now like all papers of one conference will go mostly into one area. Well, of course we have lingering uncertainties. We have this is the big change for the community, right? And we are very confident that it will work, but it might be more work, for example, for area paper chairs and overall paper chairs than it is in a typical year. But I believe, and I think we thought carefully about all of this, that it will find its balance, and we will have a better process in place. And with respect to whether I'm sure that there will still be some trends, right? That InfoVis paper might cluster in area 1 and VIS papers might cluster in area 6, but that's not something we wanted to avoid necessarily, right? Because there's topical overlap, and so I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah. And we might not be speaking of them under these terms anymore, and not too far from now anyway. So
there was a question about, and this is related, how do the areas map to the conferences? Tamara was kind enough to put the link to our amended recommendations in the Discord. That has actually a diagram on where we coded all the papers and how we felt they would map to areas, and sort of the survey we did this year was kind of a litmus test on whether that coding resembled reality in any shape or form. And while I can show you an image, we were actually pretty happy with the outcome of the survey. So there's no one-to-one match between any area or any contribution type to any of the old conferences. So it's really going to be a complete toss-up in terms of the previous siloing. So all these barriers are going to come down.
Yeah, I think that I saw a little bit of concern also in one of the comments about papers that would have underrepresented expertise on the PC. Of course, this can always happen, but with this model that we're going to move to, it's actually going to be easier to make those papers fit in because the PC will be much bigger, right? Where before you would find, let's say you're in a more vast InfoVIS kind of area, you would be picking only half of the possible PC members than you would now have available. So it should help those papers.
Okay. So the question about like enforcing double blind, I'm just gonna more or less repeat what I said earlier. Like my personal opinion is we should do that immediately. But there are many other things that we can change about the review process. And I've brought up with steering committee before that we want to have a committee like reVISe that looks at reviewing processes, but we kind of wanted to isolate the factors, right? Like changing the whole conference structure and changing the whole review process at once seems just like a huge change. And it's better to take like this in strides and do one thing first and then the other thing.
Let me also point out that this committee can't be reVISe. reVISe is over after this session here. We're done.
reVISe is dissolved in 9 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just add there were other sort of cross-cutting issues for the community that came up during the reVISe process, things that have to do with, for example, ethics and plagiarism and other aspects like that. We made note of them and we captured them and we passed them on as issues to consider in the future, but we just saw those as being sort of outside of reVISe, right? I mean, it's revising the 3 VIS into areas and sort of not reboot necessarily to say no, we need all these kinds of things.
All right, any questions that I'm missing here? I think we've covered maybe all the big questions.
We can let people argue about double blind reviewing, maybe.
I just wanted to
I'm tempted to say something,
with,
but I'm not going to.
Yeah, with that comment that reVISe ends, I guess, in now 8 minutes, I just want to take the opportunity to thank the current and past reVISe committees for all the work that you've done. I know this was an incredible amount of work, many meetings, many revisions, many interactions with the community to get feedback and try to make this as open and comprehensive and diverse a process as possible. And I think this is, it's excellent. It's unfortunate that it hit in a pandemic year that we had to try to pull this all together, which made it, extra challenging. But I think everything has gone smoothly and it's going to be a great VIS 2021 with the new structure, everything in place. And thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you, Christoph, for chairing us this year. The meetings and agendas together, really, congratulations. Well done.
I was going to say, it's been totally my pleasure to work, to shepherd such a set of diverse and intelligent and, also sometimes controversial people. I think it was, for me, it was a fantastic experience. So thank you all.
We're a bunch of people who finally get our Fridays back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, poor Shixia had to have 11 p.m. meetings every Friday for 2 years. And now it's 4 a.m. in China or 5, I don't know.
Yeah, can we get an extra round of applause on Discord for Shixia just for being here? I mean, this is that's commitment.
I'm very happy to work with you guys together. We are a team.
All right. If there's nothing else that Discord wants to urgently talk about, I think we could actually call this quits 5 minutes early. All right, so this community, thank you for showing up. We're excited that you're excited about all the stuff that we try to get going. We're really thinking it might be a great VIS 2021. See you all then. Bye-bye.
To interactively explore and visually analyze large multivariate data. For example, this cosmological simulation that is clustered into dark matter halos. We create a probabilistic data model in each cluster. We present a complete visual analysis system based on this data representation, which is especially well suited for the density-based visualizations shown here.
Data stakeholders are rarely the data experts. Making tools for them means considering how they communicate about data. Rules are a convenient way for humans to express patterns in data, like we need high variable x and low variable y. In our human-in-the-loop approach, the user selects points of interest and can immediately see rules that differentiate those data from the rest. Lots more detail in the paper, even though it's short.
Traditional clustering tools do not include users in the analysis loop. We present PK clustering, a new approach for interactive clustering using Thu VIS. First, users specify their prior knowledge. Several algorithms are run and match with the prior knowledge. Users then build a consolidated clustering iteratively with suggestions based on consensus, the graph, and their knowledge of the data. The result is a consolidated clustering.
Do you have a research question but aren't sure how to go about answering it? Are you interested in collaborating with psychologists but want to learn more about how they do research? Our paper presents a comprehensive toolkit of empirical methods organized across 4 categories to help you think about presenting visualizations